Las Vegas, March 15, 1971. The Sands Hotel bar was thick with cigarette smoke and the distant chiming of slot machines when Herbert Khaury walked in carrying his battered ukulele case. The man known to the world as Tiny Tim had just finished his 9:30 show in the lounge, 45 minutes of vintage songs for 18 people who seemed more interested in their drinks than his Victorian-era crooners. His curly hair was still damp with perspiration, and his ornate velvet jacket caught the amber light filtering through the haze. At the far end of the mahogany bar, nursing a bourbon and looking like a mountain in a 10-gallon hat, sat John Wayne. The Duke was in town filming something forgettable, but his presence commanded the room like gravity. Even in casual clothes, if you could call hand-tooled boots and a shirt that probably cost more than most people's cars casual, Wayne radiated that particular brand of American masculinity that had made him an icon. He'd chosen the corner stool deliberately, back to the wall, surveying the territory like the gunfighters he'd played for 40 years. Tiny Tim approached the bar with his characteristic politeness, nodding to the bartender. "Excuse me, sir, might I trouble you for a glass of milk? Whole milk, if you please." The bartender, a grizzled man who'd seen everything Vegas had to offer, raised an eyebrow but reached for the milk. Wayne's head turned slightly at the sound of that unmistakable falsetto. He'd seen this character on television, the strange man with the ukulele who sang old songs in a voice that belonged in a church choir. Up close, Tiny Tim was taller than expected, maybe 6'1", with an ethereal quality that seemed completely at odds with the bourbon and leather atmosphere of the Sands bar. Wayne studied him with the same intensity he brought to sizing up cattle or reading a script. There was something unsettling about this fellow. Not threatening exactly, but alien, like he'd walked out of some other century and hadn't noticed the world had moved on. The milk arrived in a tall glass, and Tiny Tim thanked the bartender with a small bow. He found an empty stool 2 seats down from Wayne and settled in, humming softly to himself. It was an old tune. Wayne couldn't quite place it, but it had that antique quality that marked everything this odd character touched. For several minutes, the two men existed in parallel silence, the only sounds being the clink of ice in Wayne's bourbon and the distant electronic bleeping of slot machines. Then, Tiny Tim began to hum louder, his voice carrying a melody that seemed to come from somewhere deep in American memory. Wayne found himself listening despite his initial irritation. There was something pure about the sound, untainted by the cynicism that had crept into so much of modern music. But what happened next would transform this chance encounter into something neither man expected. "Excuse me," Wayne said, his voice carrying that familiar authority. "That tune you're humming? What is it?" Tiny Tim turned, his pale eyes widening with delight. "Oh, Mr. Wayne, how marvelous to make your acquaintance. That's Empty Saddles in the Old Corral, written by Billy Hill in 1936. Bing Crosby had a lovely recording, but I must confess I prefer Henry Burr's earlier interpretation of similar material." Wayne's eyebrows shot up. This wasn't the response he'd expected from what appeared to be a novelty act. "You know Henry Burr?" he asked, genuine surprise creeping into his voice. "Oh my, yes." Tiny Tim's face lit up like a child's on Christmas morning. "Mr. Burr recorded Beautiful Ohio in 1919, the very record that started my entire musical journey when I was just 5 years old. His technique influenced everything I do, such pure tone, such emotional honesty. Not unlike your own work, Mr. Wayne, though in a different medium entirely." Wayne found himself leaning forward, intrigued, despite himself. This wasn't the conversation he'd anticipated having with the man he'd mentally dismissed as a freak show performer. "You seem to know your musical history," he said carefully. Tiny Tim clasped his hands together in that characteristic gesture of his. "Music is my cathedral, Mr. Wayne. I spend countless hours at the New York Public Library, studying the great recordings, learning about the artists who built American popular music. Speaking of which, might I say your film, The Man Who Shot Liberty Valance, featured some of Gene Pitney's finest work? Though I was particularly moved by the way the title song echoed the ballad traditions of the 1880s, such perfect marriage of story and song." Wayne set down his bourbon with a soft thunk. This strange character knew more about his movies than most critics. "You've seen Liberty Valance?" Tiny Tim nodded enthusiastically. 7 times, Mr. Wayne. Each viewing revealed new layers: Ford's direction, Stewart's vulnerability, your own moral complexity, and underneath it all, that musical foundation that gave the whole picture its emotional weight. What followed was perhaps the most unexpected conversation of either man's life. For the next hour, as the Sands bar slowly emptied around them, John Wayne and Tiny Tim discovered a shared appreciation for the craft of American entertainment that transcended their obvious differences. Wayne found himself admiring this odd character's encyclopedic knowledge of music history, while Tiny Tim was genuinely starstruck by the proximity of a genuine American legend. "Tell me something," Wayne said, ordering another bourbon. "All those old songs you sing, why? Why not contemporary music?" Tiny Tim's expression grew thoughtful. "Mr. Wayne, in your films, you often portray men of principle standing against the corruption of modern times, do you not? Well, my music serves the same purpose. Those vintage songs, they represent a time when love was pure, when courtship was an art, when people treated each other with genuine respect. I'm not performing nostalgia, sir. I'm preserving something precious that's disappearing from our world." Wayne studied this strange man with growing respect. Beneath the eccentric exterior was something he recognized: an artist with genuine convictions, someone who'd found his purpose and refused to compromise it for popular acceptance. "You know," Wayne said slowly, "people probably think we're crazy. You for dressing up like it's 1895, me for still making westerns when everything's going modern." Tiny Tim's face broke into a radiant smile. "Oh, Mr. Wayne, but that's exactly the point. We're both preserving something essential about America. You through your cowboys, me through my crooners. We're keepers of the flame, aren't we?" The conversation deepened as the night wore on. They talked about authenticity in an increasingly artificial world, about the cost of fame, about the loneliness of being misunderstood. Wayne discovered that beneath Tiny Tim's Victorian mannerisms lay a sharp intelligence and a profound understanding of human nature. Tiny Tim, meanwhile, found in Wayne a kindred spirit, another man who'd chosen to embody ideals rather than simply entertain. "Let me ask you something personal," Wayne said as the bartender announced last call. "All that politeness, all those old-fashioned manners, is that real? Or is that part of the act?" Tiny Tim considered the question seriously. "Mr. Wayne, I've never understood the distinction between being authentic and performing authenticity. When you ride across Monument Valley in a John Ford picture, are you acting like a cowboy, or are you simply being John Wayne? For me, Victorian courtesy isn't a performance, it's a choice. It's deciding that the world needs more kindness, more respect, more genuine care between human beings. If that makes me seem strange, well..." He shrugged with surprising grace. "I'd rather be genuinely strange than artificially normal." Wayne raised his glass in a spontaneous toast. "I'll drink to that, partner." They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, two unlikely allies in a war against the coarsening of American culture. Finally, Wayne spoke again. "You know, Tiny, I judged you when I first saw you tonight. Thought you were just another Vegas oddity. I was wrong." Tiny Tim's eyes sparkled with genuine warmth. "Oh, Mr. Wayne, judgment is so natural, isn't it? But I've found that the most wonderful people are often hidden behind the most unexpected exteriors." As they prepared to leave, Wayne made an unusual request. "Would you mind playing something? Just for me?" Tiny Tim's face lit up with joy. He carefully removed his ukulele from its battered case and tuned it with the precision of a concert musician. Then, in a voice soft enough that only Wayne could hear, he began to sing "Home on the Range." Not in his famous falsetto, but in his natural baritone, rich and warm and perfectly suited to the old cowboy ballad. Wayne listened with the concentration he usually reserved for memorizing dialogue, and when the last note faded, he was quiet for a long moment. "That was beautiful," he said simply. "Really beautiful." Tiny Tim beamed. "Thank you, Mr. Wayne. That means more to me than you know." They exchanged contact information: Wayne's assistant's number, Tiny Tim's booking agent. It seemed natural, two professionals showing mutual respect. But as they shook hands outside the Sands, both men knew this had been more than a chance encounter. They'd found recognition in an unexpected place, validation from an unlikely source. In a world that often seemed to reward only the loudest and most extreme, they'd discovered that authenticity, whether delivered through a six-gun or a ukulele, still had power. 3 months later, Wayne's assistant called Tiny Tim's agent with an unusual request. The Duke was hosting a private party at his Newport Beach home. Nothing fancy, just friends and family. Would Tiny Tim consider entertaining? The agent was skeptical until he heard the fee Wayne was offering, $5,000 for 2 hours of music. That was more than Tiny Tim usually made in a month. The party was intimate, maybe 50 people. Industry veterans and their families gathered around Wayne's pool as the sun set over the Pacific. Tiny Tim performed his usual repertoire, but with a difference. This audience wasn't judging him or waiting for the novelty to wear off. They were actually listening, appreciating the craftsmanship behind the eccentricity. Wayne introduced him not as a curiosity, but as a genuine American artist, and that introduction changed how everyone in attendance perceived the performance. Later, as Tiny Tim was packing up his ukulele, Wayne approached him privately. "Tim, I want to tell you something. Tonight reminded me why I got into this business in the first place. You've got something real, something honest. Don't ever let them take that away from you." Tiny Tim felt tears welling in his eyes. "Mr. Wayne, you've given me the greatest gift an artist can receive, the knowledge that my work has touched someone I admire." Their friendship continued for the rest of Wayne's life. They never became close intimates. Their worlds were too different for that. But they maintained a correspondence that revealed two thoughtful men grappling with fame, authenticity, and the cost of being misunderstood. Wayne would sometimes attend Tiny Tim's Los Angeles performances, sitting in the back and nodding approvingly. Tiny Tim, meanwhile, never missed a Wayne film, always sending handwritten notes analyzing the musical scores and commenting on how the Duke's moral authority grounded even the most formulaic pictures. When Wayne was diagnosed with cancer in 1976, one of his first thoughts was of Tiny Tim. "Get him on the phone," he told his assistant. "I want to hear that voice." They spoke for nearly an hour, Wayne lying in his hospital bed while Tiny Tim, calling from a hotel room in Toledo, sang Red River Valley over long distance. "You take care of yourself, partner," Wayne said when the song ended. "The world needs more people like you." Tiny Tim's voice broke as he replied, "And it needs more heroes like you, Mr. Wayne. God bless you always." It was the last time they spoke. Wayne died 3 years later, but not before telling his biographer about the night in Vegas when he'd met one of the most genuine souls in show business, a fellow in a velvet jacket who taught me that authenticity comes in many forms. Today, that story seems almost impossible. John Wayne and Tiny Tim finding common ground in a Las Vegas bar, discovering that beneath their radically different exteriors lay similar convictions about art, authenticity, and the importance of preserving what's good about America. But perhaps that's exactly why it mattered. In an era of increasing division and cynicism, two men who couldn't have been more different found a way to see past surface appearances to the deeper truths underneath. They reminded each other, and anyone willing to listen, that genuine character transcends style, that authenticity isn't about conforming to expectations, but about staying true to your deepest beliefs. Wayne went back to making westerns that celebrated American virtues. Tiny Tim continued singing Victorian love songs that honored romantic ideals. Both men remained true to their visions until the very end, sustained in part by the knowledge that somewhere out there, in the vast landscape of American entertainment, was another soul fighting the same fight for beauty, truth, and authentic human connection in an increasingly artificial world.